president. Axios suggests, quote, concern about how Trump is handling Putin, frustration by the officials about Trump ignoring their advice, or internal power games. All good guesses. And then there is the bigger question. Why Donald Trump congratulated Putin at all? On Morning Joe today, John Brennan offered an ominous explanation for this and other examples of Trump's persistently friendly treatment of Putin. That perhaps the Russian president has something on the American one.
I think he's afraid of the president of Russia.
Why?
Well, I think one can speculate as to why. That the Russians may have something on him personally that they could always roll out and make his life more difficult. Clearly, I think it's important for us to be able to improve relations with Russia. But the fact that he has had this fawning attitude toward Mr. Putin has not said anything negative about him. I think continues to say to me that he does have something to fear and something very serious to fear. The Russians, I think, have had long experience with Mr. Trump and may have things that they could expose.
Something personal, perhaps?
Perhaps.
It is useful to remember that Brennan was the CIA chief when that salacious dossier compiled by Christopher Steele was first turned over to U.S. intelligence in 2016. Joining us, Jeremy Bash, the former chief of staff at both the CIA and Pentagon, now an MSNBC national security analyst, retired four-star general, the U.S. Army, Barry McCaffrey, now an MSNBC military analyst, and with me here at this table, veteran columnist and MSNBC contributor, Mike Barnacle, New York Times media writer Jim Rutenberg, and Elise Jordan, former aide in the George W. Bush White House, now an MSNBC analyst and also a columnist at Time magazine. I have to say, they wrote down in front of me, do not compliment. But I will say about this whole group, you are all fantastic. Since we're getting ready to do this show, it's inevitable as we prepare to go on the air that the President of the United States would tweet. And so we have a couple of tweets that will lead into my first question for Jeremy Bash. The tweets trying to explain what happened yesterday and provide an answer to those who've criticized him for his behavior towards Vladimir Putin on the call. Here's the first tweet. I called President Putin of Russia to congratulate him on his election victory. In past, Obama called him also. The fake news media is crazed because they want me to excoriate him. Excoriate, not really a Trumpy word, but anyway, okay. They are wrong. Getting along with Russia and others is a good thing, not a bad thing. And then the second tweet. They can help solve problems with North Korea, Syria, Ukraine, ISIS, Iran, and even the coming arms race. Bush tried to get along but didn't have the, quote, smarts. Obama and Clinton tried but didn't have the energy or chemistry. Remember, reset. And then in all caps, kind of like do not congratulate, peace through strength. So, Jeremy Bash, my question to you, my friend, is this. You read those tweets. Is that a sufficient, reasonable, plausible explanation for what went on yesterday with the Putin call?
Well, I think we have to start from the premise, John, that we have a foreign policy vis-a-vis Russia that makes no sense. The President of the United States is obsequious to the president of Russia. We are deferring to Russia. We are letting Russia have its way in Syria with regards to Ukraine, with regards to NATO. We are letting Russia engage in activity on NATO soil by attacking on a friendly soil with a nerve agent, somebody, an individual who the United States helped win his freedom in June 2010, and I was part of that at the CIA. And so we have an approach to Russia that makes no sense. So the question is, why? I think there's a small possibility, maybe 2%, that Russia has something personally on on Trump. There's a 2% chance that maybe Trump has figured out something in international relations that no one else has figured out. But I think there's a 96% chance that there are financial ties between the Trump organization and the Russian Federation and people around Putin where they can wipe Trump out financially, and he doesn't want to offend them. And I think that's really what's going on here.
So, Jeremy, my math is not great, but I think that adds up to 98%. No. Either they have something on Trump, either personal or financial, right?
I think that's right.
Okay, that's a very high percentage. General McCaffrey, I want to ask you about a broader question. I talked before about how the source of this leak reflects a kind of rising alarm about Donald Trump among people in the national security establishment. You, of course, are a charter member of the national security establishment, and I noted a tweet of yours from last Friday that I want to read. You wrote, reluctantly, I have concluded that President Trump is a serious threat to U.S. national security. He is refusing to protect vital U.S. interests from active Russian attacks. It is apparent that he is, for some unknown reason, under the sway of Mr. Putin. So, Jeremy McCaffrey, I want to ask you two questions. One is talk a little bit about what you think is the unknown reason, but also just talk a little bit about how extraordinary it is for there to be a leak of this kind from the inner sanctum of Donald Trump's national security coterie of advisors around him, that they would take this hours after the call happened and take it to the press.
Well, look, Jeremy just outlined what's actually important. Why is our policy toward Russia not responding to egregious threats, to include armed attacks by Russian mercenaries on U.S. forces in Syria? I mean, these aren't theoretical things. Hacking into our power grid, hacking the elections, invading eastern Ukraine, threatening the Baltic states. This doesn't make any sense. That's the big question. Now, one other thought, by the way, you know, when you get talking points, I've been in the Oval Office when either the visit of a head of state or on the phone, those talking points are coordinated around State Department, always has lead, CIA, defense, etc. So when they're looking for the leaker, they need to look widely, because there's a lot of people in government now who are shocked and worried about what the president's up to. So, look, one other thing ought to get said. Everybody's been tiptoeing around the elephant in the room. Why is the President of the United States acting this way? Do they have something on them? I'd say there's a significant chance they do. And financial, I agree with Jeremy, is probably the most likely. But if there are other incriminating data, videos, tapes, whatever, the president's well advised to call in the chief of staff and his lawyers and get it out there in public, because Putin's going to stick it to him for sure sooner or later. He's got a rope around his neck if there's actually incriminating, embarrassing evidence.
Yeah, Jeremy, let me come back to you and just ask you, you think about, you pointed out that the policy makes no sense, and everybody has noted that this is a persistent pattern on Donald Trump's part, how he treats Vladimir Putin with kid gloves would be sort of too coarse. I mean, he treats them with something much more friendly than kid gloves. How do you think, from what you know, in your experience and your knowledge of the relationship, how Vladimir Putin looks at America, what does Vladimir Putin make of it when he gets off the phone with Donald Trump yesterday, having not only been congratulated for his victory, but having had no critical words aimed at him whatsoever, including related to this poisoning issue in the United Kingdom?
Well, I agree with General McCaffrey. I think Vladimir Putin is emboldened. When he gets off the phone with the President of the United States and the President of the United States fails to confront him on some basic issues affecting the national security of the United States, the President of Russia figures, I can do this again. I can do this repeatedly. And I think this is really important, John, because this is fundamentally, if you look for sort of evidence or circumstantial evidence that there was a deal, a bargain, a repayment of a debt to Russia, whether it was based on financial ties or for their meddling in the election on Trump's behalf. This is the evidence. The foreign policy expression of the United States is the way that Putin is getting what he wants.
Jeremy McCaffrey, I want to come back to you. You made the point a second ago that there's obviously a lot of alarm, not just in the inner sanctum of the White House, but throughout the government in the way that Donald Trump's behaving, especially towards Russia. And so you can't necessarily just focus on the question of whether the leak is close to Trump or not. But there's some suggestion that on this one, it probably would be. The White House's reaction to this is as follows. Their on the record reaction is, quote, if this story is accurate, that means someone leaked the president's briefing papers. Leaking such information is a fireable offense and likely illegal. So what do you think is, it's obvious that the White House has its hair on fire about this today, and in a normal circumstance, we'd say, well, as well it should. What do you think is likely now to happen inside the Trump White House as it tries to figure out who did this, and really how far afield should they be looking?
You know, it reminds me of that Casablanca deal, round up the usual suspects, and we're shocked. You know, I think when you're looking for a leaker, the military never leaks anything. The CIA doesn't leak anything. The leaks normally come out of the White House staff. But in this case, it's probably the State Department who had to sign off on the talking points. And at the end of the day, is it illegal? No. Every paragraph in that paper would have been classified, but telling the President of the United States, don't congratulate a dictator who murdered and prosecuted his opposition on a sham election, don't congratulate him. That wouldn't be classified. What would be classified is we're listening to Putin's cell phone, or his mother's letters are being steamed open. So they're wasting their time looking for the leaker. The problem is the policy of the United States. President Trump, as Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces and National Security Interests of the United States, isn't doing his job. Why is that?
A very good question. I want to bring it to the table and start. Let's just talk a little bit about John Brennan. Mike, you've known John Brennan for a long time. So I'm going to play in a second a little bit of a review of some of the things that Brennan has been saying as he's become increasingly vocal with his criticism of President Trump. But first like kind of set the table here a little bit about John Brennan and the notion of people say, well, what does John Brennan know? And I say to them generally, John Brennan knows everything. He knows a lot. Explain why that's true.
Well, because he's been around a long time. His entire life has been spent in the intelligence community. And General McCaffrey made a couple of really important points to consider here prior to, we'll show the Brennan clips. But one of the reasons, maybe the principal reason, that story was leaked within 2 hours of when it occurred after the phone call by the president to President Putin was made from the residence, not from the Oval Office, unstaffed practically by a president whose knowledge and instinct about foreign policy is tissue thin to be charitable. So he makes the call, it happens, it's leaked, and the level of disrespect that many people in the intelligence community and the diplomatic community have toward the President of the United States, the leak is the product, the result of that disrespect. The aspect that General McCaffrey was speaking to, if you've been in this community, if you've served as a patriot for many, many years, as John Brennan has, as many other people have, as General McCaffrey has, cyber war has been declared in the United States by Russia. And one other thing, General McCaffrey alluded to it. There was an attack by Russian operatives in Syria a couple of weeks ago. It was an American Special Forces unit. They turned out to be much better than the Russian operatives. The President of the United States has said practically nothing about those things.
Yeah, and you think about it, Mike, you've got a situation where it's both the case, I think, that a lot of the members of the intelligence community have assessed the president's seriousness, have assessed his knowledge level, have made all of those determinations and have come to disrespect him because of that. Also the way in which he conducts himself. And then there's the fact that the president has basically been waging war on them and impugning their integrity, impugning their honor, impugning their intelligence, and I mean intelligence here with a small I rather than a capital I, basically not since before he got in the White House, not since he took the office, but during the transition was when this war started out. So you wonder why there's bad feeling. That's part of the reason. Some of it's on substance and some of it's on, I see Jeremy Bash signaling at the camera there, so he has something to say. I'm going to ask Jeremy, give me your comment, because you got something to weigh in on here, and then I want to play some Brennan.
Is it possible that it was actually the president who told someone that he was congratulatory to Putin? Because if you think about it, it's not just the note cards that were leaked. It was the actual phone call. It would have to be somebody on the line. Now, maybe there were other staff on the line, but is it possible that we're kind of missing a big picture here? The president wants it known that he congratulated Putin?
Anything's possible in this administration. Anything.
It's totally inconceivable in almost any other circumstance, but in this circumstance, it's not totally inconceivable. Like I said, I want to play this John Brennan thing. The former CIA director has joined this network and has been on television a fair amount with, as I say, kind of with a mounting sense of alarm and increasingly vocal and adamant criticisms. Let's just take a look at a little compendium of John Brennan on Donald Trump.
It's no secret to anybody that Donald Trump was very ill-prepared and unexperienced in terms of dealing with matters that a head of state needs to deal with, head of government. Donald Trump says nice things about Mr. Putin and continues to deal with the Russia investigation, I think, in a very sort of questionable manner. The Russians, I think, have had long experience with Mr. Trump and may have things that they could expose and reveal. I think Mr. Putin and others in the Kremlin right now are unfortunately very satisfied with some of the things that have happened over the last 14 months. I think he's afraid of the president of Russia.
General McCaffrey, I want to ask you, I said a second ago that I thought John Brennan knows everything. He probably doesn't know everything, but he does know an awful lot. And if you go back to 2016, in the spring of 2016, Mr. Brennan has testified publicly and has said many times that he was one of the earliest people in the Obama administration, in the intelligence community, who started to get concerned about the possibility of there being links between Donald Trump's world, his campaign, his businesses, and other aspects of his orbit to Russia. And he was the one who originally went to the FBI and said, there's stuff that you need to look at here. There's a lot of things John Brennan can't say on television because he's still bound by classification. But just give us a sense of what, if you think about the totality of that period from early 2016 to now, what are the kinds of things he knows that he can't talk about?
Well, I don't know. What I do know is what was in the public realm throughout this period was, of course, they were actively in multiple venues dealing with the Russians, business, intelligence agents, etc. They were hacking our election system. So the only question really, and by the way, approaching the Russians as a new president with some peace approach is not a bad idea. So I think during the election, there was no particular surprise to this. Now he's president of the United States, we're a year in, and he's not responding to the fact that U.S. artillery and air power just killed a couple of hundred Russian mercenaries attacking U.S. forces. What is going on? Why hasn't he talked about murdering, trying to murder Russian operatives in the U.K. and probably also in New York City? So we've gone from, you know, a sort of an odd friendliness to a strongman. Putin's running a criminal enterprise, essentially, to now where the president doesn't, at face value, look like he's supporting U.S. national defense interests.
General Barry McCaffrey, thank you for spending this time with us. Before we go to break, I want to ask Jeremy Bash one last quick question. The thing I want to lead you to, Jeremy, is the question of the Steele dossier. And one of the things that I think John Brennan knows is John Brennan, having been in this business for a long time, he knows Christopher Steele and has probably known Christopher Steele for decades, given Christopher Steele's history in British intelligence, his role in British intelligence and his role in Five Eyes. He was in a position as one of the first people to come into contact with some of the activity reported in the Steele dossier. He's in a position to evaluate the credibility of the source of it and the output of it in a way that a lot of other people are not. So do you think that, without putting words in John Brennan's mouth, that backdrop has at least some part of informing what he thinks is up between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin?
I don't know for certain because I haven't been read into those intelligence reports, and I don't know that he knows Christopher Steele personally, John, but I think it's likely that he did hear from leadership of other intelligence agencies, including those that are closely allied with the United States, saying these reports are circulating, we believe they're credible, you should take them seriously.
Right. Okay. Jeremy, thank you. Coming up, we'll have some extra executive time for Donald Trump today with all that snow, and he's using it to go after Robert Mueller again. Some Republicans have seen and heard enough. They're now warning him with a word that they have not used before: impeachment. Also ahead, Stormy Daniels' lawyer says that the president's legal team has stepped in every trap he's set. Is Donald Trump helping his accusers build a case against him? We'll be right back with all of that.
It's the buy one, get one free paint sale at Ace.
Our biggest paint sale of the year.
Buy a gallon of our top paint brands and get one free.
And you know what else is free? Our help.
With the Ace Extra Mile Promise, if you don't get everything you need in one trip, we'll bring it to you. And the delivery is free.
Don't miss the buy one, get one free paint sale. Get great savings on our top paint brands.